everybody, welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to do a demonstration of the tension gauge that I built for my X-Carve. I use this tension gauge to set and adjust the tension on my X and Y rail belts. Today I want to demonstrate to you how to use this jig to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen off the tension on my left hand rail so that we can see a reading that's out of where I want it to be. So we'll measure that. Then we'll go over to the right hand rail and we'll measure the tension on that belt. We'll go to the X axis and we'll measure the tension on that belt. Then to follow up, we'll go over to the left hand rail and adjust that tension on that belt to be the same as the other two. Okay, let's get started. Okay, this is a view of the left hand Y rail. So what I'm going to do is show you how to set the jig up on the machine. Okay, so if you take a look at the jig, you'll see that this faceplate stops a little bit more than 2/3 of the way down. So what I'll do is I'll go to the inside of the rail and I will slide this and butt the top of the rail up to that piece of aluminum, to the faceplate. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that. If you can see, that just butts right there and it stays right there. Now I'm going to take a clamp and I'm going to clamp that right on to that rail. Okay, so give me a second to do that. Okay, so there's a clamp. Now it's held there pretty well. So the one thing you need to make sure of is when you put your clamp on, you have clearance under here. Okay, so that when you do your measurement, the belt doesn't hit the clamp. Okay, so to make the measurement on your belt, you push this plunger down, you grab your belt, and you put your belt onto that ledge right there. Okay. And make sure you can see that in the video. Let me zoom in just a little. Okay. Then you push the plunger down till it hits the fence to the rail, and then just let it go. Okay. Now, see if you can read this. Okay, I think you can read that. So if you can read that, you see that indicator on the slider is showing 3.5. Okay, that is roughly 3.5 pounds. Okay, the jig is actually calibrated to be approximately the weights that are numbered there. So 2, 3, 4, and 5 is approximately the number of pounds. So right now that says about 3.5. Okay, so I don't like my belts that loose. I like my belt around 4.5 actually is about where I like it. My machine seems to run good. I don't seem to have any problems with skipping. The belts are not too tight, they're not too loose. They seem pretty happy there. So what we'll do is we'll go over to the other side and measure that one. Then we'll measure the X and we'll come back and adjust this. Okay, this is the right hand Y rail. So I'm going to demonstrate attaching the jig to the rail one more time. Simply take the jig to the inside of the rail, pull it up against the rail until the face plate hits the top of the rail, apply the clamp. Okay, make sure you have plenty of room in here. so that you don't interfere with your measurement. Press the plunger down, slide the belt onto the ledge, and then just let go. Okay. Okay, I think you can see that, and it shows 4.5, which is where I like to keep my belts adjusted to. That's just for me. That seems to work really good for me. Okay, so we'll set up on the X-rail, and then we'll measure it as well. All right. Be right. Okay, I've got the jig already set up on the X-rail. So I'm just going to press the plunger down and lift the belt up and set it on top of that ledge and let it go. And you can see there we have about 4.5, which, as I mentioned before, is about where I like to adjust my belts to. That just gives me what I like. Okay, so going to go over to the other Y rail to the left hand side, the one that was off, and readjust it to make it the same as the other two. Okay, so give me a second to set it up and we'll be right back. Okay, I got the jig set up on the left hand Y rail, and this is the one that was a little bit loose before. I think it was showing about 3.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure it again. So push the plunger down, lay the belt onto the little ledge, okay, and then just release the plunger. And 3.5 is what it's showing again. And this is one of the cool things about this jig, is that all your measurements are reproducible. What I do is I leave a little mark on my rail where I set this thing, and I try to set it in the middle roughly. And I measure the same place every time. So I can measure it again, 3.5. Measure it again, 3.5. So having repeatable results is really important if you're going to be adjusting things and using these measurements to set up your equipment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this belt. Okay. I don't want to adjust the tension on this belt with it on the jig. Always remove it from the jig first. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this belt, and you can see this belt is really loose here. There's no guitar string action going on there at all. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this belt. So I'm gonna give it about 2 turns. I think there's 1, there's 2. Okay. Then we will measure it again. Press the plunger all the way down to the top of the rail, lay the belt onto it, and just release the pressure. Now we're reading 4. Okay, I like mine a little tighter than that. I like mine around 4.5. So I'm going to take it off the jig. I'm going to adjust a little bit more. Give it 1 turn, 2 turns. Okay. I'm going to put it back onto the jig. Just release the pressure. It's a little bit above 4.5. I'm going to give it 1 more turn. Okay, there's 1 turn. Okay, press the plunger down to the top of the rail and just release the pressure. 4.5, exactly where we want it to be. And again, this measurement is repeatable. If I measure it again, I'm going to come up with 4.5 again. I'll come up with 4.5 every time. And when you do your measurement, you want to press the plunger all the way down to the face of the rail and just release slowly on the plunger. If you spring it up, you're going to get some random measurement. What you want to do is press it down and release it. You'll get the same measurement every time. Okay, so we'll do a wrap up and we'll call that the demonstration of the jig. Okay, so that concludes the demonstration on how to use the tension gauge on your X-Carve to adjust your to measure your belt tension and also to adjust your belt tension. So it's pretty simple. I typically will take this jig and use it before I run my machine, and just to verify that, hey, these things are where they were when I left. They haven't changed. You know, none of the belts have slipped or they haven't stretched or whatever. It takes a couple of minutes at the most, you know, just to throw it on there, clamp it on there, check it. If it's right, walk away. So the only thing I would mention is one other thing I would mention is for the scale. Okay, when you're reading the scale, it is roughly I've got it labeled there 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is roughly 2, 3, 4, and 5 pounds. Okay, and what that indicates is that there's, for instance, whenever I'm setting mine to 4.5, essentially that's saying that there's about 4.5 pounds of spring tension against that belt before it stops moving. Okay, the gauge is calibrated, and I went through a lot of math to figure out how to calibrate this gauge and get the scale to read correctly. When I say it's roughly, I'm saying if you measure it with some test equipment or something, you're not probably going to come up with 3.000 pounds, okay? You might come up with 3.6 pounds or 3.5 pounds. You know, it's a rough measurement. It's not intended to be a piece of test equipment in that regard. The intention is to provide a way to, number one, have a repeatable measurement. Okay? Number two, have an indication of that measurement so that I can throw this thing on this rail, measure it, look at the indication, and know that this is within the range that I want it to be in. This is within this range of readings, I get good performance. Or at this particular reading is where I calibrated my machine so that I can keep those belt tensions at that same reading. Okay? Because I know we have a lot of rocket scientists or rocket engineers or whatever. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there as a heads up. Hey, it's not intended to be a piece of test equipment in that regard. So that's really about all I have to say about it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. And thanks for your time. I appreciate it.